A Judeo-Christian alliance. This talk concerns the broken and useless theology we are now stuck with in this day and age. In the New Testament book of Matthew 24, Jesus foresaw a time of terrible tribulation, worse than any human suffering, past, present, or future. And many Christians are still undecided whether the tribulation has already taken place or still lies ahead. Are we now in the pre-tribulation or post-tribulation age? And to this day, the Christian clergy wrongly assumes that the tribulation is a misfortune that will overtake all of humanity. But when Jesus referred to the coming tribulation, he was not referring to all humankind. He was talking to the Jews alone. And the tribulation concerns what the Christians would do to the Jews, as has actually taken place for the last 2,000 years. And what was Jesus trying to do in the first place? Well, a clique of corrupt rabbis was busy gathering tens of thousands of documents that recorded their own inferior wisdom. They were gathering this into a gigantic ocean of rubbish that was to become known eventually as the Talmud. The Talmud. Now, the covenant consisted of 10 commandments and the oral law. The oral law was made up of brief, simple, and powerful explanations of each commandment. And the covenant had served perfectly for 1,500 years. But the rabbis began to mix their own Talmudic rubbish with the covenant. And Jesus could see that the inferior rabbinical rubbish would soon contaminate and swamp the covenant. And this would destroy the national understanding of the covenant and would expose Israel to the terrible consequences of breaking the covenant, as described in the book of Deuteronomy. Meanwhile, the gigantic Talmud enabled the rabbis to create a vast Talmud education industry that generated enormous sums of money for the rabbis and their Roman accomplices, and some of the profits went all the way up to many senators in Rome. And the people soon became bored with the rabbis and their Talmudic trash and began to lose their pride and passion for the covenant. And before very long, just as Moses had predicted, Israel became as rotten as any other nation, or even worse. And to this day, the rabbis still force-feed the Jews the same Talmudic trash that brought us down 2,000 years ago. And as a result, we are still the most hated people on earth. Now, Jesus fought to his last breath to prevent the breach of the covenant. And he did so by teaching the genuine covenant and oral law, instead of the rubbish being taught by the rabbis. And his brilliant oratory put the crooked rabbis to shame. And eventually he gathered such a huge following that it threatened the entire Talmud racket. So it became obvious that Jesus had to go. It was just a question of how to do it, as far as the crooked rabbis and their Roman partners were concerned. Meanwhile, Jesus could see that the Romans were very impressed with his teachings, and he realized that the Romans had seen the enormous possibilities of creating a new religion amongst the Gentile nations based on his name and his teachings. The Talmud racket had taught the Romans how to make money from religion, and they saw that they could make an untold fortune by working with a Gentile following 100 times the size of Israel. If they could do well from a small nation, how much better could they do from a gigantic population? And Jesus could see that this plan would indeed work very well, and that the new Roman-backed religious movement would become the most powerful religion and financial empire ever seen on earth. But he also knew that the Jews would get in the way. They'd get in the way of the Romans and their arrangements. The Jews would never accept the idea of the divinity of Jesus, and their heckling and scoffing would destroy the whole enormous plan. And he could see very clearly that the Romans would never allow this to happen. They would never allow their project to be jeopardized by a small people such as the Jews. So firstly, they would murder him. And then they would get rid of the rabbis who were expecting to be included in the project. And then they and their millions of Gentile converts would accuse, revile, torture and butcher the Jews for a seemingly endless period of time, known only to God. And Jesus warned the nation to expect this catastrophe and to flee as soon as the Roman project got underway. He warned them to get out of there as fast as their legs could carry them. And we now know that Jesus was 100% correct in his predictions for the Romans and their huge army of believers. And this huge army of believers inflicted tribulation upon the Jews, the like of which had never ever been seen before and will never be seen again. Since then, the Jews have been tormented, butchered or expelled from wherever they took refuge. And the Holocaust itself was just one of these terrible episodes of tribulation. And perhaps the Holocaust may not be the last episode. And Jesus said that if this time of tribulation was not shortened, there would be not one Jew left alive. But because of a small elite amongst the Jews, the tribulation would indeed be ended. And that small elite band would have to get rid of the rabbinical and Talmudic millstone around our necks. And they would have to prevent the more foolish of our brethren from supporting the left. Or the tribulation will come back, and none of us will survive. Now, Christian scholars are very sharp, and they are getting sharper by the day, and they're getting bolder. And as soon as they begin to see the tribulation from the Jewish viewpoint as described here, then they and their Jewish colleagues will very quickly solve hundreds of other scriptural matters that have been baffling us for centuries. And then finally they will throw out all the nonsensical prophecies and join with the Jews in redeeming the simple and powerful covenant. Then the deserted churches and synagogues will spring to life once again with power and prestige that seems unbelievable in this age of lunatic leftism. And as for the Jews, the Talmudic rabbis will fight tooth and nail to keep their power. And they'll fight tooth and nail to keep the ability to teach falsehood to the Jewish people as they have done for 2,000 years. And the Jews will then understand why the Bible refers to the Talmud as the abomination of desolation. Now, all of this drama, past and present, is dealt with in chapter and verse in the book God versus the Left. So why not get yourself a copy and let its presence in your home identify you as a godly conservative who knows what it means to defeat the left and secure our Judeo-Christian civilization. So this is Paul Kaplan signing out and thanking you for your time and attention.